Thank you, Shauna. Hi, everybody. It's good to see some old friends and some new friends too. The chat's open. If you haven't typed in where you're from, that would be great. I live in Olympia, Washington. I'm here today, just a little bit south of Seattle. So it's good to be here. Let me go ahead and put my slides up. Okay, great. So in today's talk, I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the topics you're familiar with, open licensing. But really, what I'm going to dig into is this idea that going forward, we need to think really hard about owning the knowledge that we create, specifically publicly funded knowledge, and operating that knowledge, not turning that over to others who may not share the same values that we share. So to start off, and I should also say, apologies for my voice. I've got my weapons of choice with me today. I'm pretty sick, but we're gonna push through and hopefully you can hear me okay. So a few key guiding principles that drive the decisions at CC and the open knowledge work that we do. And I'll go through these very briefly. One is that we believe publicly funded knowledge that funds really anything, educational resources, research, public sector information, data about potholes in streets, hardware, software. If it was funded with public money, it should be open by default. If it's a copyrighted thing, it should have an open license on it. If it's a software thing, should have an open source software license on it. If the public gets into funding public sector AI, that should all be open as well. And so wherever we can, we should push for this and get the data in the public domain and zero embargo period on publicly funded knowledge, meaning the moment that it's created with public funds, it should be open to all of us. Second, public funds allocated to produce knowledge should be spent as effectively and efficiently as possible by the stewards of these funds who typically work for governments. And so we ought to be very thoughtful about being efficient, not being wasteful, and maximizing the good that can come from public money. Third, all this publicly funded knowledge should be stewarded by, and by stewarded, I mean hosted, updated, shared, advertised by public institutions, the academy, or trusted nonprofits. The alternative to this, of course, is we should not be turning this knowledge over to commercial interests. This should be stewarded by us. By us, I mean you all at universities. Equity should be at the core of any open knowledge model. We should start with equity. I know DEI, at least in my country, in the United States, has fallen out of favor with the current administration, but set that aside. Those are core values in our open education community, and all of our projects, including publicly funded projects, have equity at the core of what we're doing. Commercial organizations should be treated by public institutions as work for hire. So there may be times that we need commercial services. We may need the commercial sector to produce content for us, and that's fine. But we should treat them as work for hire. Just like your university might put out a tender or an RFP to buy 1,000 new computers for your computer labs, we should do the same thing when we want to buy content or buy services. We should put out an RFP. We should pay commercial entities for their services. But if anything is produced, any content's produced, the public institutions should own that, which is the last point here. Any copyright to publicly funded knowledge should be held by the authors or the public institutions that funded that knowledge. So if we bought it, we should own it. And then the copyright should not be transferred to commercial publishers. We see this all the time with open access publishing and closed access publishing, where commercial publishers, after we've taken all this public money to do public research, they say, yes, turn your copyright for the article over in order to get published. And we should not be doing that. We should be, if we fund something, the public should retain ownership over it. So those are some of the key principles that we live by, I should say. And I've broken this talk into kind of 4 sections. We've got a big opportunity and have had for the last 25 years. There are certainly some headwinds, some challenges in front of us. Things are changing. And then what can we do? And I would argue there's quite a bit that we can do with our existing power that we have. First, and this will be old news for most of you, we've had a tremendous opportunity over the past 25 plus years. We've had things went digital. Of course, digital things, we can make unlimited perfect copies of them. We've got the internet, so we can move those digital things very cheaply and efficiently and fast. We've seen decreasing costs in not only internet access, but also computers, hard disk space, cloud, et cetera. I don't want to minimize at all digital divide issues. Those still certainly exist, and there's still challenges there. But on the whole, we've seen the cost structure come down radically in the last 25 years. And we had the emergence of open licensing, both in software and with Creative Commons. And so with those things all together, that allowed us to legally share this content that we're talking about at the marginal cost of zero. That's highly efficient. It's when you're looking at public money and investing public money, it's an incredibly high return on investment for the public dollar or yen or whatever currency you're working with. Reduced friction to do what we call the 5 Rs, right? It's when we've got the legal rights to keep a copy, to reuse it, to change it in some way, and then to share that revised work, that adaptation out with others. The licenses empowered us to do that as individuals, as institutions, as governments. We've seen increased innovation because of this sharing. We've seen new pedagogical opportunities and new open practices emerge. And we've seen a real, and I would say this goes really with open practices, we've seen empowerment of learners and faculty and teachers in a way that we really hadn't seen before, because when we deal with open content and with open practices, we can really customize learning environments. We can have students be part of driving their learning pathway. Faculty can translate, modify materials to make those materials exactly what they want for their learning space. So all these good things come from things being open. And of course, open is better than closed across all these different sectors. We mostly work in education. A lot of you work in research, but also data, science, software, hardware. Open works well in all of these spaces. Of course, open doesn't just mean free. Our friend David Wiley long ago said open is different than free. It's better than free. Open is free plus legal permissions to do those 5R type activities. Before, or I should say after, open source licenses came out for software, and these these things started to happen, digital, internet, decreasing costs of compute, and open licensing. All of us in education, research, science, other spaces started to say, well, that's great for software, but how do we share our articles? How do we share our textbooks? How do we share our curriculum? How do I share my online course? How do I share my images, my videos, my test banks, my AI prompts that I'm creating, my model weights increasingly? And the answer was, well, if it's copyrighted, we can share them under a Creative Commons license. You probably already know us. We're a nonprofit. We work globally. We are the open licenses steward for the CC licenses. We were founded in 2001. We operate everywhere that copyright operates. And we have a global network of experts we call CC chapters around the world. The CC licenses are free. They'll always be free. We've actually dedicated them to the public domain using CC0. They've been proven over time. They've become an international standard for open copyright licensing. They're built on top of respect copyright law, so you're not giving up your copyright. You're not breaking the law when you use a CC license. You're actually respecting copyright law, and you're keeping your copyright, which is good. You should keep what you own. The CC licenses have gone to court several times, and they've never once lost in a court of law over 25 years. And we work with all of those various open communities, education, science, data, et cetera, and are very proud of that. Our vision is very simple. We seek to create a world where education, culture, and science are equitably shared as a means to benefit humanity. So we're in this game to make sure that people's lives get better and that we protect the planet in the process. So these probably look familiar. You've seen these licenses. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these, but just to refresh those that might be new, we have 4 different legal conditions that you can mix and match to get 6 different open copyright licenses or 6 CC licenses. And so by is attribution or giving somebody credit. Share alike means if I make an adaptation of your work, I have to share my adaptation under the same license that you shared your original work under. So everything on Wikipedia, for example, is under a BY-SA license. NC is non-commercial, so you may not use my work primarily for commercial purposes. Or another way to think about that is I, the copyright holder who put the NC license on my work, I'm retaining commercial rights for myself. And then ND means no derivatives. So you may not modify my work, you can't adapt my work. ND actually allows individuals to adapt works, but not share them. And of course, in open education, it's all about let's make updates, let's change it for the better, let's translate the work, and then let's share those with others. And so for all of the major OER definitions out there, ND doesn't work because we want to adapt and then share those adaptations in open education. So really, when we're looking at OER compliant licenses, we're looking at the 4 licenses, not the 2 ND licenses. We also have public domain tools. The main one is CC0, or the public domain dedication, where you can actually apply this and give up your copyright. This is quite common for data sets, just to positively affirm that those data sets are in the worldwide public domain. The other one is called the public domain mark. This is just to mark a work that's already known to be in the public domain, so that you don't get fooled into paying somebody for it. It's already in the public domain, you can use it. The licenses themselves are, and the public domain tool are perpetual, irrevocable permissions. Perpetual in the sense that they last forever until the copyright expires and then the work's in the public domain. And irrevocable, you can't pull them back. You can't revoke the license. That's really important in open education because if Beck, for example, shares something, I put it in my course or my textbook or whatever, Beck can't reach in a year and say, oh, Cable, I don't want you to use that anymore. I'm going to revoke my license. You can't do that with CC licenses. Once somebody licenses a work, it's out there forever under that license. You can put another license on your work if you want. So maybe I started with a more conservative license, like a BY-NC license, for example, and maybe I don't really care about NC anymore and I want to shift to a CC BY license. I can add a CC BY license to it as well. And now the world can have it under either license. CC, we like to say that we proudly put the open in open access, OER, open data, open science, etc. Because all of these different fields rely on the open licenses to legally share the works that are produced, that authors have been generous and contributed to the commons. More broadly, when we're talking about open knowledge, we mean all these things together, all these different sectors that we work in, and the open policies to support all of the above. I'll come back to open policies in just a moment. When we're talking about open educational resources at CC, we're certainly talking about no cost access. OER is not behind a paywall, so that free component, at least for a digital format, is really important. Of course, print may cost something, and there's a lot of models out there to recover costs, which are fine. Usually they're done at cost and not for a profit. But there at least is a digital version. Usually it's available at no cost. There's a CC license on the work that allows for adaptation, so not the ND licenses, but one of the others, or it's been put into the public domain. So that's the legal component. It's in any medium or format. So oftentimes OER gets shared in lots of different ways and sometimes in multiple formats. We try to, as an author of an OER, we try to share them in multiple formats so they're more useful to more people. And then there's no embargo period. So we push that, as soon as the work is openly licensed, hopefully people are sharing it right away. This is really important when you're dealing with publicly funded works. And we ask questions like this, like why do we teach others? Why do we do science? Why do we publish research? And the core idea that we operate from is that knowledge is a public good. It's not a private good. You shouldn't have to be rich. You shouldn't have to be a billionaire to access the best knowledge in the world, the latest scientific research, to get an education, et cetera. Anybody should be able to access these things, especially when they're funded with public money. And of course, something that's near and dear to all of our hearts is that open sharing and open education advances universal access to knowledge and furtherance of fundamental human rights. Everybody deserves, when we're humans, we deserve to get access to knowledge and to culture. Of course, this has been codified in the United Nations Declaration for Human Rights. In Article 26, it simply says everyone has the right to an education. Doesn't matter who you are in the world. If you're a human, you have this right. So that's a bit about what's happened in the last 25 years. All good stuff. But what should we do in the next 25? One of the ideas that we've been working on for a few years now is really to ask ourselves, well, if we only have so much time and only have so many resources, and only can have so many partnerships with different organizations and governments, where should we focus our limited time and energy and money? And our answer to that is, let's solve the world's greatest challenges. Now, there are many, but the UN has done a pretty good job of listing them as the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. You may have also heard of this, called the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. And the idea is that all of these challenges in the world are shared by pretty much every country in the world. So most countries have problems with number 4, making sure everybody has access to a quality education. Everybody's got problems with number 13, with climate change. Any country living that has a sea border has challenges with 14. We've all got challenges with number 7 and probably 1 and 2. And so these are shared challenges around the world. Our thesis on this is very simple. If you want to solve these challenges, the knowledge and the culture about them must be open. So the knowledge, the education about them, the science about them, the data, the research, all of that needs to be open. Because, I mean, think about it for a minute. If you want to solve for climate change, is that going to happen if all of the world's climate change research is locked up behind paywalls? Or if all of the data that's collected by Copernicus in Europe and by NASA and NOAA in the United States and the space agencies in China and the European Union, and if all of the research funded in Canada, if that's not open about climate change, how can we possibly solve for problems that we don't understand, that we don't know about? And then the culture, if you look at the list, I'll back up here, these are not sort of naturally occurring problems. These were problems created by people, right? We did this. And to understand how to solve these problems, we don't just need the knowledge about them, but we have to understand the culture within which these problems were created, and we have to understand the cultures, the many cultures that we live in now, and how do we share that cultural knowledge, those cultural artifacts, the art about those challenges, et cetera, so that we can more deeply understand how to solve them. Coming back to OER just specifically for a minute, OER is one component of sharing knowledge about the SDGs. OER can be the educational resources that we use to teach the public about the SDGs. You'd be surprised how many people have never heard of the SDGs and don't know they exist. The SDGs, of course, are constantly in flux, and openly licensed content can be updated in real time. That's super helpful when things are changing. You can change the educational resources about them. Learners can work on, this is near and dear to my heart because my doctorate's in education psychology. And we know in EdPsych that when you put learners in complex, authentic, kind of real learning spaces where the outcomes of their learning really matter to them deeply. They not only learn much better and they retain that knowledge and they learn it more deeply, but they really enjoy it. They really throw themselves into it. And so, when learners understand, when students understand about these challenges, they care and they want to learn about it and they want to help solve the problems. Learners want to make a difference in the world, and this is meaningful work. Our son in high school walked into his biology class, and the SDGs were big 20 by 20-foot poster was on the wall. And as they were learning biology, their teacher kept referring back, saying, "Well, you're going to learn biology in the service of clean water. You're going to do a project on biology related to how are we going to get cleaner energy? How do you get denser battery cell technology that retains energy longer on the grid?" And so we can use the SDGs as meaningful frameworks as we're learning. This is one of the many reports that UNESCO and other UN agencies have put out about the SDGs. This one's specifically about how youth around the world are demanding quality climate change education. And part of that is all of that should be OER, which is exactly what UNESCO has called for. And so, I hope you share this idea with me, thinking about it in those terms, that sharing knowledge is and probably always has been a social justice issue. This is something that's core to us living together in a global setting. So that all sounds really nice and sounds like a good goal, something we can collectively work on. But of course, it's not easy. There are challenges, and I'm going to focus in very specifically on commercial interests fighting back against some of these goals. Ironically, in the United States anyway, they call it inclusive and equitable access. We'll see how long that lasts under the new administration. But we have these programs. Many countries have these programs called inclusive access or equitable access, where the cost of course materials, the cost of textbooks, is actually wrapped into student tuition and fees. So the students don't see those costs anymore. They're hidden. And so, yeah, your tuition went up a little, but good news, you don't have any textbook costs. And students go, "Oh, okay, well, tuition always goes up a little bit, so I guess that's okay." And so the challenge there, of course, is that if you're faculty and you have sort of unlimited access to a catalog of commercial content, why might you want to use OER now? There's still a strong value proposition there, but it's a much harder sell than it used to be. In the research space, of course, we have article processing charges. So, you want to publish open access? You want a CC license on your work so anybody can read your work for free? Your work's not behind our paywall? Well, you're going to have to pay us a bunch of money for that. Article processing charges can be as low as a few $100s. But for some people, that's a month's wage, depending on what country you're in. Excuse me. And APCs can go all the way up to several $1,000s, in some cases $9,000 or $10,000, which is just insane. And usually it's public money from the grant that was given to do that research on the public's behalf has to pay those article processing charges. So what are commercial journals doing here? Well, they're trying to maintain their high profit margins and their business models. Like, I get it, they're trying to run a business, but it's not our responsibility as people who are trying to advance the public good to prop up old business models. Those business models need to change. I'll talk about that in just a second. We've had some wins. I'm in the United States. A really big win was the United States mandated a few years ago in the Nelson memo that all publicly funded research must be freely available with no embargo period. Before that, we had another guidance document that allowed for a 12-month embargo. This one actually pushes for, without requiring it, open licensing, which is good, mentions it. But they do require data sharing. They require no embargo. And you must share the publicly funded research that you create. So this is good. We like to see policies like this at national levels. To give you a sense of commercial publishers and what they do. This was actually language that was put into the United States House Appropriations Bill a few years ago in 2023 that blocked the White House Office of Science, Technology, and Policy that put out this memo that said, "Hey, agencies, your publicly funded research must be open." And this is what it said: none of the funds made available by this act, by the appropriations bill, which basically funds the entire U.S. government, may be used to implement, administer, apply, enforce, or carry out the memo that says that we should ensure free, immediate, equitable access to federally funded research. So, we see that and it's like, well, what are they doing? Well, it's pretty obvious what they're doing. They don't want publicly funded works to be open by default, and they want to maintain the model they've had where all of the research gets funded by the public. The faculty that do the research are largely funded, and the researchers are largely funded also with public money. The peer review process that's done is by the colleagues all around the world of those researchers, oftentimes also funded with public money. And then at the end of that process, when we finally get the research summaries and the articles and the preprints, the publishers are standing there saying, the commercial publishers are standing there saying, yeah, turn your copyright over to us and pay us a big article processing charge, and then we'll publish you. I mean, it's this insane, broken system that we've allowed ourselves to get into. Good news. There's some changes that are coming, and I think some new opportunities that come with those. One is that we've got some recommendations. These are global guidelines out of UNESCO. One is the recommendation on open educational resources. That was passed by unanimously by all 193 UNESCO member states in 2019. If you haven't seen this document, and I've got it linked here, I'll share the slides after the presentation. But you should go read it. It's an excellent document. It talks about this idea that publicly funded educational resources should be open by default. And it talks about all other aspects of open education as well. There was also in 2021 a UNESCO recommendation on open science that shares a lot of the same ideas. Publicly funded science, publicly funded research should be open by default, and they encourage national governments to do that. These international frameworks are important. It allows us as countries to say, hey, we've got some cover. We've all voted together that this is where we should go. So now let's implement that at national levels. It allows provinces and states in countries, maybe their country's not ready to move yet, but maybe your province or your state is ready to adopt a policy that supports open education and open access research and open science. But the idea here is that when we work at the national government level, we can really have scaled impact. I know that Canada is, who many of our audience members are from today, is on the verge of releasing a new open access policy, open science policy, that's being tuned right now, and that's great. So how might we think about this, all this stuff, and how could we share knowledge in the most effective, efficient, equitable, and socially just manner? If we could do anything we wanted, what would we do? Well, I don't know that answer for the open education space, although I've got some ideas. But I think we can draw a lot of our inspiration from what's happening in the open access research space right now, where a lot of the problems with open access research that I talked about, embargo periods, turning copyright over to journals, paying article processing charges that really locks out a lot of global community members from participating in science. They have said enough. The open access space have said we're not going to do this anymore, and we need to talk about a different model. So we've had gold OA, green OA, different colors of OA. We need to talk about what they call diamond OA. And there's different names for this. Of course, diamonds have negative connotations in many parts of the world. So maybe this isn't the term that we end up using, but this is the term that's being used today. But the idea is that with diamond OA, it's a model to ensure equitable access to both read research and to submit research articles to community-driven, academic-led and owned open access journals. This is very much in line with our principle at Creative Commons that about publicly funded knowledge that I talked about at the beginning. And so this breaks it down a little bit. Diamond Open Access is when open access journals don't charge fees to authors to read, so there's no subscription fees, or to write. There's no article processing fees. So we want to make sure everybody can participate in science. There was a big study done. There's lots of these journals out there, particularly in Latin and South America, has been very strong in this space. The Europeans are really starting to jump into this now as well. And the second Diamond Open Access Conference was just held, or I should really say third, in South Africa. And it was a real focus on African nations moving toward Diamond Open Access as well. But Diamond is more than just, you don't have to pay to write or to read. It's not about that business model. It's really a governance model. And so all the content related elements, the journals, the platform titles, the preprints, the papers, the reviews, data, all that stuff are controlled and led by academic led and owned communities. So they're not, to state the obvious, today they're mostly led by commercial journals that then are demanding all these things of it, demanding high prices, demanding ownership by copyright transfer. And they're saying no. They're saying we will run all that stuff. We, the academy, we, the publicly funded institutions in the world. And second, the service-related aspects of publishing can be contracted with commercial providers on a time-limited basis. Sometimes we might need them, but we should really think about how we can create public infrastructure for those services that we need with journals. They like to say there's a sustainability model for this. It's to fund research as a public good. Like that's sort of the point, right? We want everybody to be able to read and write research. This is difficult, but I think we need to do it. You want to solve the SDGs? We're going to have to do this. You want to have an equitable model for contributing to and sharing knowledge where everybody gets to participate and not just the wealthy? We got to do it. We need to ensure that publicly funded knowledge is available to all of the public. So that's what Diamond Open Access is working on. What might Diamond Open Education look like? Well, I think we can follow their playbook a little bit. How do we ensure that publicly funded educational resources are open by default? Well, we can do that with open policies and open procurement, which I'll talk about in just a minute. And we need to make sure that there's a sustained publicly funded open education infrastructure, repositories, training, services, help desk, I mean, you name it, to support all educators. Because no country has really done that well at a national level or even a provincial. Some provinces in Canada have done a really good job at a provincial level, but we oftentimes do it at the institution level, which is great too. One of the things they're talking about in Diamond Open Access is what are all the levels: national, global, regional, national, states and provinces, and then institutions, and what services should be provided at each one of those levels. And not just the services, but also the governance, like where should decisions be made and who should be making them. And so it's a complex conversation that's taken a lot of time and will continue to take time. Takes shifting public resources away from channels that are sending those public resources into commercial hands and retaining them in public institutions. None of this is easy, but it's all possible, and the Diamond folks are working hard at it. I think we can have a similar conversation in open education. Same argument, there's a sustainability model for open education. We need to fund education as a public good. We truly believe that education is something that everybody should have access to. You shouldn't have to be extremely wealthy to access it. We need to treat it as a public good, just like we have a mail service or we have roads that everybody can rely on, and we have bridges and other infrastructure. We need to think about science, education in the same way. So this all sounds maybe too big, right? How can we possibly compete with billion-dollar companies that have lobbyists in our governments and are, giving campaign donations to politicians? What's our power? It seems like we have no power. So what can we do? Well, we actually have a lot of power. This is one example where a set of editors of a journal. This was one of Elsevier. Elsevier, if you don't know, is kind of the biggest commercial journal provider, and makes makes billions of dollars a year in profit off publicly funded research. But the 40 leading scientists that were on the editorial board of this top journal left. They said, we're not doing article processing charges anymore. That's greedy. Those are not our values. And they just left the journal and they went over and they set up a brand new open access journal that didn't charge article processing charges. And so that's one way to fight back. Another way we can fight back is we can work with funders. Usually that's governments. Doesn't have to be at a national level. It could be at a provincial level or at a state level. We work with foundations, and we can go to these funders and we can say, when you give money to somebody to build research, to build software, to build educational resources, to build new services, whatever it might be, please require an open license on the outputs of those grants and contracts. And that way, open becomes default when public money is being used or when foundation, philanthropic money is being used. Creative Commons spends a lot of time in this space helping to write these policies, helping to persuade governments and foundations to adopt them, and then helping them implement them because it's a new thing. They haven't done it before in most cases. Another thing we can do is, so that's very top down, right? Let's go to where the money comes from. Let's have a new policy, and then let's drive that requirement down to the outputs. And basically the argument there is, if you want our money, you're going to open what you build. If you don't open what you build, you're out of compliance and you can't have our money anymore. This is bottom up. So open procurement says, look, I don't know, University of Toronto, you regularly buy stuff, and some of the stuff that you buy, maybe educational resources or new technologies, et cetera. So first, figure out what you need. What is it that you need? Maybe you need a new calculus textbook or curriculum. Can you build it in-house, keep the copyright with the institution or the authors, and then openly license it? That's great. Do you need to buy it? Or is already available on the market? Fine, go buy it. Or maybe it doesn't exist and you need to hire somebody to build what you need. Open procurement says, great, do that. Run the RFP, pay money, get your money's worth, run a competitive process, do your due diligence. But then in your contract, own the copyright to what you buy. We typically don't do this. Usually when we work with vendors, the vendor says, hey, we own the product, and then we get a license to use it from them, like a bilateral contract, but we don't own it. So we should say, no, we're not writing that deal. We're going to own what we buy, and then we're going to openly license what we own. And so in shorthand, we should buy what we need, we should own what we buy, we should share what we own. So I'm going to stop there. So we've got a little time for questions, but I would just invite you all, if any of this sort of syncs with you and makes sense to you, then let's work together to solve the world's biggest problems. We've got a good list in the SDGs. There's a lot of work to be done, but we need to get some of these core governance and financial components in place. I'm on Blue Sky and LinkedIn and other social media, but feel free to reach out to me. Love to talk more. But with that, let me turn it back over to Shauna, and we'll take some Q&A.
Okay, so I've allowed you all to unmute and turn your video on if you want to speak or talk or be seen while you do so. We also have the Q&A and the chat as options for you to ask questions.
I haven't been watching the chat. Did any questions come in?
Nothing, not yet. Would you like to tell the story about your friendship with David Wiley?
David's a good guy. He's doing some really interesting work right now. For those of you that don't know David Wiley, he actually built open licenses before Creative Commons even existed because he wanted OER out there. Um, and then David has been professors at different places, Brigham Young University, at MIT, Weber State, or not Weber State, Utah State University. Anyway, and then David's now working on a very interesting project around AI, mostly focusing on K-12 learners and really looking at AI and all of the important components of an AI model. And how do we open that up using a lot of the same principles that we talked about today and that we've used in open education for 25 years. And so it's, AI is a different ballgame. There's prompts, there's model weights, there's the source code itself, there's tuning, preferencing. And so all of these things are kind of individual services, if you will, that could be opened. And so to the extent that AI will probably have an effect on how we teach, on content we use, at least in an assistant role. Um, I think it's important that we be able to see inside the black box and modify, adapt, etc. So anyway, David's working on that now. The story I think you want me to tell is that I had developed liver cancer and had something called primary sclerosing cholangitis. I was basically going to die real quick if I didn't get a liver transplant. And David gave me two-thirds of his liver at the Mayo Clinic, which was quite nice and saved my life. So yeah, I'm a big fan of David Wiley. He tells me the story that right before he went in to surgery, before they put him out, he asked them to put a CC BY license on the liver that was going to me, and he wanted attribution, but they didn't think that was very funny.
We have a comment here. Well, they're coming in. Great session, especially the synergy between education as a public good and Diamond Open Access. Sorry, you have to leave. Thanks for coming, Richard. Could you elaborate on how institutions of higher ed might actively pursue this vision? For example, would they create that infrastructure? Would they incentivize faculty to openly publish as a tenure requirement?
Yeah, that's a great question, or great questions. So there's a lot of things that institutions can do. They're very helpful to this whole conversation. One is most institutions have some discretionary funding that they give their own grants and provide incentives or provide release time, et cetera. And to the extent that there's this optional money that the administration may control at a university or college, they can put an open license requirement on that money. So, nobody's forced to take that money if they don't want it. It's optional. But if they take it, they need to put such and such, Creative Commons license on what they built and share it. So that's one thing they could do. Another thing that's really important for usually deans of departments to do, or deans of colleges, is to look at the promotion and tenure policy and rules, and wherever possible, bias the promotion and tenure process toward open being valued and not unvalued. And so traditionally, promotion and tenure, um, just hasn't mentioned open at all. And sometimes, depending on the personalities on the committee, some people are, look at me giving away my textbook under an open license and they say, "Oh, you're stupid. You should be collecting royalties for that. You're letting your work go out into the world for free, and we're gonna mark you down for that. We've actually seen that in some P&T reviews. And so we need to counter that by being very clear in promotion and tenure guidelines and tell faculty the moment they're hired. Hey, if you publish in open access journals, that's viewed as a plus because we know more people are going to read your work. We know that more people are going to see the attribution statement and link back to the university repository where we have a copy of your work. That's good for your reputation. It's good for our reputation. And most important, your science is in your research is getting out there to the world. And so we're going to give you bonus points if you publish in open access. If you publish your educational resources openly as OER, you also get bonus points for that because we know that you are probably saving your students money. You're probably engaged in some more innovative practices with your students in class. You're probably going to have a positive impact on your department. Other faculty, we know this happens. Other faculty will come to you and ask, how did you do that? My students complain that I have a $200 textbook in my class and they never like that. I'd sure love to find a set of open materials to replace that. And so, we need to have conversations with deans usually and vice presidents, provosts to change promotion and tenure rules. Something that we did, I used to work at the Washington State Community and Technical Colleges. We decided we wanted to have our entire associates of science degree online and obviously digital, but also open. CC BY on anything that we built. And then we didn't build very much. We mostly remixed and adapted what other people were generous enough to contribute openly. And so, for example, we had a physics team. I had 10 physics professors, and their job was to build out all the physics curriculum for the gen ed degree. And the first thing they did is they went to MIT and they downloaded all MIT physics courses and started poking at them. And they were like, these are amazing courses, but they're amazing for MIT students. They're a bit different level than what we need for community college students. And so we need to do a lot of revising and remixing, which they did, gave credit to MIT, and then we had the physics curriculum we needed. And so the system in this case, or as a set of institutions, incented that by saying, we got some outside money from a foundation and from our state legislature, where we said, if nobody's forced to do this, this is optional. But if you want to be part of this, we call it the Open Course Library. If you want to be part of this project, here's what we're doing. And we will pay you extra money, to be part of it. Or if you don't want to have this extra project, we'll buy out release time for you. So we'll buy out one of your courses. We'll hire somebody else to teach that section of your course. And the time that you would have taught that course is allocated to this OER project. And faculty did different things, but the important point here is it was optional. Nobody was forced to do it, and people were compensated well for their time, which is always important, right? We don't want people to do this for free or to add to their workload and do it off the side of their desk. This is important work and should be compensated well, and we should respect and honor and give awards for the great people that work in this space. Those are a few things that you can do at universities, but there were other.
Yeah, Kathy says, I'm interested in hearing more about the open procurement process. Has any institution had success with this, and what language did they use for this action?
Yeah, so open procurement can happen in several different ways. I'll tell you a few stories. One is, this was years ago, probably 8 years ago. I went up to Seattle and I sat down with the Seattle superintendent of schools and the curriculum director for Seattle. So Seattle's, by US cities is kind of a mid to small size big city. It's, I think they have 6 million. I don't know how many students they have. I have to look. They have a lot of students, but certainly the biggest in Washington State, but we're a pretty small state, population-wise. What they did tell me is that every time they buy new curriculum for sixth grade biology or 10th grade math or 11th grade political science, every time they update their curriculum, which usually meant, a new textbook for the students, new teacher materials, new test banks, etc. Every time they did that for one grade, one subject, it cost them $6 million of public money to do that. And so the open procurement thing we did with them was we said, look, um, why don't we save you $6 million in a whole bunch of these cells? And then you can take that $6 million and you can do better things with it, like hire more teachers, reduce class size, hire more services for students so that people have better, mental health support or whatever. Let's use that public money in a more efficient and effective way. And so what we did is we looked for existing OER that met their needs either perfectly, it was like ready to go off the shelf, or it just needed a little bit of revision that the curriculum director's team was willing to do. So that's one story. Another way to think about open procurement was what we did with the New York Regents. So this was also a long time ago. It was like 10 years ago. But there was a big chunk of money, $40 million went from the US national government, from the Department of Education to New York State. There were new curricular guidelines in the United States for math and English language arts. $40 million goes to New York to basically update their curriculum. New York comes to us and says, hey, we've heard about OER. We'd love this 40 million to go into creating OER. We don't know how to do that. Like, how's that done? And so we went through an open procurement process with them and told them, put out an RFP, can your own people build it? And they were like, no. And so what about a consortia of, faculty and teachers from across New York State, and instructional designers and accessibility experts? This is what we did in Washington. They said, no, it's not going to happen. We just want to buy the materials from a publisher. We said, okay, well, if you're going to do that, buy what you need, own what you buy, share what you own. So the components are run the RFP, but in the contract, it's going to say that whatever's produced, the copyright for all those products are going to be owned by the New York Regents, by the public K-12 institution in the state, basically the State Department of Education. Second, you should have an open policy internally that says all this stuff that you own, you're going to put a CC BY, preferably license on it. And then third, you'll pay the providers, and then they'll go away after they're done. Maybe you pay them a maintenance fee to keep the stuff updated every year or so. But the maintenance fee, pay them whatever you want, 5%, 10% of the first cost. But again, whatever their updates are, you own it. You're going to openly license it and share it. New York Regents said, this is great. And so we helped them write the language into the contract. They were off to the races. Three bad things happened that we learned from, and you should learn from too. One, the lawyers in New York State got a hold of this and they took out the we should own what we buy part, because New York had a weird law in the books that said that public employees couldn't personally benefit from the expenditure of public funds. And somehow this all got twisted in the lawyers' minds that by using public money and then New York Regents owning that content, that was going to somehow be a conflict of interest, and that the employees of New York State would benefit from that somehow. I don't quite follow the logic, but that was their logic. And so they took that out. And so the copyright went to the vendor. And then New York State said, because as soon as you lose ownership, you can't openly license. And so then New York State was in a position where they basically had to, say, pretty please, vendors, would you please put an open license on it? That was our intention, until our lawyers messed it up and took that out. And the vendor didn't have to do anything. But the vendor said, fine, we'll put a BY NC-SA license on it. And that's not what New York wanted. They wanted a CC BY license, but they gave up their copyright, so they lost the ability. So that was like problem number one. Anyway, these materials get built. Turns out they're really good. They're called Engage New York. You can go on the web and type in Engage New York and you'll find them. It's mostly math. It was so good that 95% of the school districts in the United States adopted either all the curriculum or chunks of it under this license, under the BY NC-SA license. The next thing that happened is, because it was so popular, It was all digital, right? But everybody had the files, and it was under an open license. They didn't really care what license it was. It was free curriculum, and they could use it. They could make modifications to it as well. And of course, it was an OER compliant license because it didn't have ND. Fine. I mean, not fine. It was sort of a botched procurement process, but okay. The outcome is looking pretty good. So then it's so popular, and there are still digital divide issues, of course. And so some big school districts, well, I should say mid-sized school districts, that didn't have their own printing facilities, they said, "Hey, we want to print versions of this OER for our students, and the printing's not very expensive. We'll pay for it, but we don't have printing facilities." And so what did they do? Well, they put it on a hard drive, all the content. They walked into FedEx Kinko's and they walked into Office Depot and they printed 5,000 copies of this OER. Well, this OER had an NC clause on it. It was by NCSA. And so the owner, the copyright holder, which was the vendor who took the $40 million from New York State, or most of the 40 million, said, "Well, wait a minute. I have an NC clause on the OER, and I'm the copyright holder, the vendor," which was all true. And it went to court. It went to some of the highest courts in the United States, not the Supreme Court, but like a couple steps below. It was in the appellate courts. It's all written up on our website if you want to see it. And basically, the courts said, and we backed it up with an amicus brief, kind of a friend of the court brief, that with CC licenses, you have the licensor, which is the person who holds the copyright and puts the license on the work. And then you have the licensee. That's the entity that's using the work and exercising the rights in the license. So if I built a textbook, I put a CC BY license on it, I'm the licensor, and then you use my book, you're the licensee, right? So the school district in this case is the licensee, and Great Minds, which was the company, the vendor that built this, was the licensor. The licensee has to comply with the terms of the license. And so what the judges, both judges, there were two court cases, found was that the school districts were not using the works primarily for commercial purposes, right? Which is what the NC clause says. They were giving them away for free to the students. And so the lawsuits against the service providers were null and void because Office Depot and FedEx did not. They were just making copies. That's what they do. Yeah, sure, they got paid for their copies, but they were doing it in service of the school districts exercising the rights of the license. So that was all great how it worked out, but the whole thing was an open procurement mess. And the really bad thing that happened is while the lawsuits were going on, everybody was afraid. And so it had gotten up to like 95% penetration in US schools, which was amazing, huge win for OER and open education. And then these big court cases got started, and a lot of other school districts, even the ones that were using it, were like, "Oh, like we're legally, we don't want any legal risk. We can't afford a lawsuit. We don't want to get sued." And so the use dropped like a stone. And these court cases go on for, a year or more. And so it's just I think it's a good story to say, look, do it right, in contract from the get-go, own what you buy, or buy what you need, own what you buy, share what you own. That own what you buy is really, really important. Do not turn over the copyright or other intellectual property, patents or whatever, to commercial providers, because you're never going to get it back. And once you turn it over, they have all the power and they get to make all the decisions. And so, if anybody ever wants to do an open procurement contract, you want to run some language bias, just send me an email. I'm cable@creativecommons.org. We're happy to look at it, give you some advice. But then you got to stick to your guns, because they're going to come at you hard in negotiations. "Oh, no, we can't possibly do this contract. Oh, no, this is outside our business practices. Oh, no." And you have to have the backbone to say, "Fine, you're not getting our money." And that's the only way to win. It's like buying a new car. I don't know if any of you have gone into a car dealer. Like, the way you get the best price is you walk away. You have to say, "Fine, if you're not going to meet my terms, I'm walking away." And 9 times out of 10, they'll come chasing you into the parking lot. And so, you got to play some hardball, and we're happy to back you up when you need to.
Well, we are out of time, and I want to just thank you so much for sharing your knowledge today and your experience. And I guess if there are further questions, they can contact you on Blue Sky and the other avenues you suggested. Someone would like to know if we're going to share the slides. If you share them with me, I will share them when I share the recording with all the registrants.
Yeah, let me share them right here so everybody can just have them. There is the link, and unless otherwise noted, they're all licensed CC BY. So enjoy,
Awesome.
remix until
Thank-
your heart's content.
Thanks again, and thanks everyone for coming out today.